Okay, so when we're looking at security, we're going to be looking at things like the common threats and vulnerabilities when it comes to PCs, right? Prevention methods, things like basic Windows OS security settings, right? How to enforce security within for your PC and within your organization. All right. So when it comes to security, we're not only talking about software security, we're also talking about physical security, right? Okay, so common prevention methods, we're going to look at physical security, digital security, user education, and principle of least privilege, right? Physical security is going to be focused on things like when your physical PC, right? Any security that you would need for your PC. So you wouldn't want someone to walk into your office and just take your PC and run away with your data, right? Same thing is as if you were talking about it with your PC at home. All right. Digital security, we're going to be looking at things like ensuring that our data is secured and well encrypted so that nobody can steal it, nobody can change it, and nobody can delete it. Right? User education, it's important for users to know how to protect themselves when it comes to their own personal data. Right? And principle of least privilege, we look at in an organization, we wouldn't give everybody access to all our documents, all our files, right? So only certain people would have access to certain documents, right? Whatever is required for them in their job role or job description. Right, so when we look at physical security, we're looking at things like key locks, right, or laptop locks, right? You'll see if you have a laptop, some of your laptops might have a little notch on the side, right, where you have your charger. So you buy these key locks here, and what happens is you'd either unlock it using a key or you'd unlock it using a password or a PIN, right? When it comes to physical barriers, you need to have a multi-barrier system. So you can't just have one barrier, right? You need to have multiple. So you'd have a key lock. You could have something like a lock for your door, for example, right? Maybe in your organization, you might have something like a visitor's logbook, so you can log who comes in and out of the office, as well as maybe your office specifically, right? When it comes to things like physical security, we also look at things like, let's say, securing your physical documents, right? We have biometrics, we have badges, key fobs, and multi-factor authentication, right? Biometrics is dealing with, it's dealing with, how can I say this? Things like fingerprint scanners, right? Things like facial recognition, right? It's dealing with you with your physical features, right? So you can't copy someone else's fingerprint, right? You can't copy someone else's face. So that's why we use these things when it comes to unlocking our phones or laptops, right? Or entering a building. Okay, we have badges as well, right? A badge, you might have a badge that has what do we call it? Mm, maybe it's a tag, right? A tag that might have it's near NFC. I think it's near factor configuration, right? Well, basically what it does is it generates a password, right? And then on the server generates a password. And if the password matches, then you can unlock a door, or maybe you can, it's also used for payments, like for example, with your bank cards, right? Bank cards uses tap and go. So that uses NFC, right? If it matches, then it goes through. You also have key fobs. Key fobs would be things like remotes, right? Your remotes. So your remotes will generate a password, and then that server will generate a password. And if it matches, it'll open for you, right? Multi-factor authentication basically means that when you use more than one method to access something, right? So for example, maybe your ATM, an ATM requires your card, right? Your physical card, and it requires a PIN, right? So that will be multi-factor authentication. Maybe, for example, you have a phone where, or you have tap and go, right? So you use your bank card to tap, and then maybe you might put on a PIN as well, right? So that'll be multi-factor because you're using more than one method to access your funds or access authorization to come into a building or so on. Right, then we have physical security, RFID, right? RFID badges and smart cards, RSA tokens or privacy filters, right? So RFID badges and smart cards, it's basically, it gives you access to resources like buildings, parking lots, computers, and so on, right? Um, RFID is basically radio frequency identification, right? It's wireless. There's no contact that's used with the cards, right? Physical tokens, maybe physical tokens would be where, like I said before, you'd use secure ID and it'll generate a one-time password, right? Privacy filters would be things like it's a film or glass add-ons placed on your monitor, right, or on your screen. So it prevents people from walking past and seeing what you're doing. Maybe if you're working with sensitive data and so on, right? You'll notice that a lot of our smartphones these days, if we buy a screen protector, we can buy a screen protector with a privacy filter that's fitted on, right? And then that enables, or that doesn't allow for other people to walk past and just see what we're doing on our phone. Right, then we look at common security threats. We have social engineering and malware, right? So social engineering would be where an attacker would try to acquire information about your network, your system, by social means, right? So things like talking to people in the organization, things like trying to fish out what your passwords are, right? Social engineering can happen over the phone, right? It can happen by email or in person. Malware, right? So malware is basically malicious software, right? Malicious in the fact that it's just trying to cause evil. It's trying to cause yeah, it's trying to cause evil when it comes to your PC. Right, it's just trying to break it down. Maybe it's trying to delete information. Maybe it's trying to get information from you, right? You can also have things like keyloggers, right? So keyloggers will be like software where as you type your password in, it copies it and it basically it reiterates it to someone else. Right. Next, we're looking at fake emails, fake callers, unauthorized persons attempting to gain access to the buildings. Right. So with social engineering, you have things like fake emails. Maybe you might get an email from an organization that you maybe work with, right? And you realize that it's not actually that organization; it's someone else just pretending to be them, right? Maybe you might get an SMS saying that there's a Nigerian prince that has R1 million for you, right? And all you have to do is just enter in your bank account details, right? That's an example of social engineering. Shoulder surfing. Shoulder surfing would be where someone is looking at your screen to try and get information from it, right? Uh, phishing would be websites that look legitimate, right? That might ask you for your credentials, things like your username, your passwords, and so on, right? So that would be phishing. There's two examples of phishing that we look at, which is spear phishing and whaling, right? So spear phishing would be where the attacker is trying to uh, use information that the target would less likely question, right? Because it looks like it's coming from a trusted source. For example, if you get an email from someone who claims that they're working from NetBank, right? That would be something like spear phishing. Because maybe you have a NetBank account, they know that you have a NetBank account, and they're trying to get access to your information. Then you have whaling. Whaling is where you get a message or a mail from someone within your organization that's trying to harvest your information, trying to harvest your data, right? Now, it's not actually that person, but it's someone that's pretending to be that person, right? And then we look at things like password attacks, right? Password attacks would be when someone is trying to gain access onto your PC or your network by repeatedly attacking it, right? So what they try to do is they try to crack your passwords, right? And there's different types. There's brute force attacks, right? So brute force is where they try to guess your passwords until they guess it right, right? Maybe they'll use your hints, or maybe they'll use forgot password and try and get into your email. Right, so then we look at malware. So with malware, malware is basically viruses, right? Or virus is another type of malware, right? Viruses have symptoms such as flashing, annoying messages. It might slow down your system. It could delete or add files to your system, right? It could cause the system to not boot, right? It might shut down mysteriously, and then the program sizes could increase because the virus attaches to it. Um, so when it comes to your antivirus, right? So what happens with antivirus is generally you have a definition database, right? The antivirus keeps updating this definition database, and it has definitions for each of the viruses, right? It basically looks at the virus and looks at the signature of the virus, and the signature might be something like the algorithm of the virus, right? If it finds a virus, what it does is it takes the virus and it puts it somewhere on the hard drive that the virus can't access any other files, any other folders, any other applications, and so on, right? And then you have to make sure that you keep your definition database current, because the viruses that always come up. There's viruses that can change, and the signature can change as well, right? So then we look at how viruses work. Virus spreading from an infected system using the network or removable media, right? You have an infected machine, and then you might pass the virus through the network, or you can pass it using a removable media, something like a USB stick, for example, right? If you have a USB stick, or if you have a laptop that's infected, and then you put the USB stick in, and then you pass it to someone else, they can get the virus, right? The goal of the virus is to render your system inoperable and to try and spread it as far as it can go, right? A lot of viruses these days use emails to spread the virus, right? You'll see something like where you might get an email and in the subject line, it just looks like gibberish, right? When you see those types of things, you don't open them. Next, we have types of viruses. We have armored, coded to avoid, detect. Companion, it's attached to a program. Macro virus, which exploits macros, right? Multi-partition, party, which is multiple attacks. We have phage, which has to be deleted. Polymorphic is a mutation. Retrovirus attacks the antivirus itself. And stealth, which is moving from files to file. Right? Since viruses are a subset of malware, anti-malware software, it typically does everything that an antivirus software does, as well as identify threats, right? So if we look at the armored virus is designed to make itself difficult to detect or analyze, right? Armored viruses cover themselves with protective code that stops debuggers or disassemblers from examining critical elements of the virus. Looking for Notion. She's in that classroom. No, no, third one. Sorry, guys. Um, yeah, so it's specifically coded to make the detection difficult, right? Solution would be to identify and educate the users. Companion viruses attach themselves to legitimate programs, right? They create a program with a different file name extension. The program could reside, or the file could reside in your system's temporary directory. When a user types the name of the legitimate program, the accompanying virus execute instead of the real program. Okay, and then a macro virus would exploit the enhancements made to an application program. It can infect programs like Microsoft Word and has a mini basic program language known as macros, which could cause cause it to run a sequence of actions automatically. Macro viruses are one of the fastest growing forms of exploitation. Right, and then I'm just going to move on to polymorphic viruses, right? Now, this is important. Polymorphic viruses would change to avoid detection. So it'll change its form to avoid detection, right? The viruses attack your system. It might display a message on your computer and delete files on your system, right? It'll attempt to hide from your antivirus software because it'll keep changing forms, right? The virus will encrypt parts of itself to avoid detection. When the virus does this, it's referred to as a mutation. Right? We have a retrovirus. A retrovirus attacks or bypasses the antivirus software installed on a computer. You can consider a retrovirus to be an antivirus virus, right? Retroviruses can directly attack your antivirus software and destroy the definition database file. Okay, so when the information is destroyed without your knowledge, you'll be left with a false sense of security. The virus may also directly attack an antivirus program to create bypasses for itself. And then we have a stealth virus. A stealth virus attempts to avoid detection by by masking itself from application. It could attach itself to the boot sector of the hard drive, or it may move itself from file A to file B during the virus scan to avoid detection. Sorry, guys. Right, so now we're looking at other types of malware. We have man-in-the-middle attacks. We have worms, Trojans, ransomware, rootkits, spyware, spoofing, zero-day attacks, and zombies or botnets. Right, so man-in-the-middle attacks basically is where the software hides between the server and the user, intercepting information. And basically is able to record the information for someone to view it later, right? Maybe it might alter the information, right? The software could also be outside intercepting packets, which will be TCP IP hijacking. Right, you have worms. Worms are malware that self-replicate on your network and that can take over your PC quickly. Right, the primary method of preventing propagation of malicious code would be to use antivirus software. Right, then we're going to look at workstation best practices. Right, for your workstation, you need to make sure that you have things like strong passwords. Right, passwords should be as long as 10 characters minimum. Right, so if we think about it, characters would be, if we just look at capital letters, small letters, and numbers, right? If we look at capital letters, we'll say 26, right? Plus small letters would also be 26, and plus numbers would be 0 to 9. So that would give us 62. And if we look at it, if we have a 4-character password, it'll be there's 62 different types of options that we have, right? And 62 times 62 times 62, right? Times 62, or 62 to the power 4 would be 14 million password possibilities that you could have. And that's just for 4 characters, right? So imagine working with 10 characters as a minimum for passwords. So make sure that you have your passwords created that are strong, right? Also, we would say require passwords and expiration, right? So require all accounts to have an expiration policy, right? So it would expire after maybe 6 months or so, right? Account management, ensure that you restrict user permissions, you set login time restrictions, right? People can only log in maybe during office hours, for example, right? Disable any guest accounts, lock an account after a certain number of failed attempts, maybe configure a screen lock. Right, then you have data loss prevention. Data loss prevention systems monitor the contents of the system, right? Workstations, servers, and networks, and so on. It makes sure that no key content is deleted or removed. It also monitors who might be using the data, right? Or who might be transmitting the data. Okay, examples would be something like tripware. Okay, then solutions, we have antivirus and anti-malware software. We have firewalls, anti-spyware, directory permissions, user education, principle of least privilege, and email filtering. Right, if we look at it, maybe for directory permissions, only allow certain people to use certain files or certain directories on the network, right? That'll also come into play when it comes to principle of least privilege, right? Don't allow everybody to access everything. Email filtering, allow email filtering for things like spam, right? If we allow email filtering in our network, then it ensures that a lot of users that aren't aware of things like viruses that can be spread over email, they won't be able to access it because they won't see it. It'll go in straight into the spam folder. Right, but also with that, it's important to just check your spam folder if you can, because sometimes things can get mixed up and maybe someone might send you an email that's important that might get sent to spam. Right, so we're going to look at firewalls. When it comes to firewalls, we look at packet filtering. Packet filtering will pass or block traffic, right? So you have standalone personal host-based or network-based firewalls included with hardware such as routers, right, which sits on the layer 3 of the OSI model, right? The basic purpose of a firewall is to isolate one network from another, right? So your network from any other network or the internet, right? It can come as an appliance, right? A freestanding device that operates in a largely self-contained manner, requiring less maintenance, and it'll support less maintenance and support than a server-based product, right? Then the functions, we said packet filtering. Packet filtering passes or blocks traffic specific to addresses based on the type of application and the port that is used. Maybe you might allow port 80 and exclude or block port 23. Right? Proxy firewalls. Proxy firewalls are used to process requests from an outside network. The proxy firewalls examines the data and makes rule-based decisions on whether the request should be forwarded or refused. A proxy firewall typically uses two network interface cards, right? This type of firewall is referred to as a dual home firewall. One of the cards is connected to the outside network and another card is connected to the internal network. Right, we also have stateful inspection firewall. Most devices used in networks don't keep track of how information is routed or used. After a packet is passed, the packet and the path is then forgotten. In the stateful inspection or stateful packet filtering, records are kept and kept using a state table that tracks every communication channel and can deny packets that were not requested by the internal network. Right, and here's the example of the dual home firewall, right? You have network A with a NIC card, network B with a NIC card, and then a dual home firewall segregating two networks from each other. Right, and continuing with solutions, we have anti-spyware, directory permissions, user education, principle of least privilege, and email filtering. Spyware exists almost primarily for commercial gain and affects Microsoft systems more. Windows Defender and Security Essentials were released to combat them. Right, directory permissions, NTFS file permissions are built into the file system. You have things like usernames and passwords for permissions. Right? User education, you have to educate the user in what they should and shouldn't open, right? AUP describes how employees can use the company's resources and any consequences for misuse of it. Right? Principle of least privilege, when assigning permissions, give users only the permissions that they need to do their work and no more. And email filtering would be what we spoke about, filtering any spam. It's stopped at the gateway before it gets to the user. Right, then you have a virtual private network. A virtual private network is a connection that is often secure, that occurs through a public network, which is unsecure. Right, so maybe you'd use a VPN, for example, to connect to your network at work. Right, it can be hardware or software on the client or server. Right, and you have a VPN concentrator that encrypts data before it gets to the VPN client. Okay, so workstation best practices, we looked at setting strong passwords, requiring passwords, restricting user permissions, changing any default usernames, right? Disabling the guest accounts where necessary, right? Making the screensaver require a password, right? If you're going to open up again, right? And then disable any auto run functionalities when it comes to inserting storage devices, right? Like USB sticks and so on. Right, then we have the Windows users. The Windows users, we have the administrator, right? The administrator is the most powerful account of all, right? It has the power to control everything on the system, from the smallest task all the way up to changing the operating system. Right, power users are members that are given read and write permissions to the system. Right, it allows them to install most software, but keeps them from changing things like key operating system files. Right, the guest account is created by default. It should be disabled if not in use. They have the same rights as users, except they can't get to the log files. Right, the best reason to make users members of the guest group is to access the system only for a limited time. If you're going to be using it only for a certain time. Right, and then you have standard members. Standard members are members of the group that have read-write permissions to their own profile. They can't modify the system-wide settings. Right, shared permissions versus NTFS. Shared permissions apply only when a user is accessing a file or a folder through the network. Local permissions and attributes are used to protect a file when the user is local. Share permissions are directory levels only, while NTFS permissions extend to files, right? So NTFS protects you at file level. Share permissions can only be applied at directory levels. Okay, then you have NTFS permissions. We have allow, not allow, or deny, move or copy, and then they talk to you about the file attributes like full control, modify, read and execute, list folder contents, read and write. Right, so think about it when you're working with your files, right? If someone is using your computer and has an account like a guest account, right? You can give them permissions or allow what you'd like them to do on that file or that directory on your PC, right? So allow, maybe you'd allow the group members to perform a specific action, right? Not allow, it doesn't allow them to perform an action, right? Deny, on top of not allowing them to perform, it also prohibits them over prohibits them and also trumps them over any other permissions that were allowed. Right? And then moving and copying. So if you're moving and copying files, copying will create a new entity. Moving would simply relocate that specific file. So if you copying would ignore all permission levels created on the original file. If you move, it'll keep the original permissions. Right? Moving from NTFS to FAT32 loses the file's permissions, while the reverse would add the file permissions. Right, and then you have NTFS directory permissions. We have full control, modify, read and execute, list folder contents, read and write. and then we can look at it in more detail, right? For full control, it gives the user all of the other choices and ability to change any permissions to that directory, right? The user can also take ownership of the directory or any of the contents. Modify combines the read and execute permission with the write permission, and further allows the user to delete everything, including the folder. Read and execute would combine the permissions of the read with those of the list folder contents and add the ability to run any executables. List folder contents, the list folder contents permission, known simply as list in previous versions, allow the user to view the contents of a directory and to navigate to its subdirectories. It doesn't grant the user access to the files in these directories unless specified in the file permissions. Read will allow the user to navigate the entire directory structure, view contents of the directory, view contents of any of the files in the directory, and see ownerships and attributes. And write will allow user to create new entities within the folder. Okay, then NTFS file permissions will be full control, modify, read and execute, read and write. Okay, and then here we have full control, which gives the user all the other permissions as well as permission to take ownership and change the permission. Modify will combine read and execute with write permission, right? And will also allow the user to delete any files. Read will allow the user to view the contents of the file and see the ownership and attributes. Read and execute will combine read permission with the with the ability to execute, right? Write allows the user to overwrite the file as well as make any changes to attributes and see ownership and permissions. Right, then we look at administrative shares and versus local shares, hidden attributes, single sign-on, BitLocker, and BitLocker to go, and encrypting file systems. Right, administrative shares are created on the server running Windows on the network for administrative purposes. They always end with a $ to make them hidden. Hidden attributes, the files with this attribute doesn't appear on the user's directory listing, right? You shouldn't change this attribute on a system file unless absolutely necessary, right? Because if we see system files, then a general user might see it and think, okay, you know what, I can just delete this. So they might delete it and it might change the system, right? Single sign-on gives users access to all applications and the systems when they need to log on, right? And BitLocker allows you to use the drive encryption to protect any files, including those that needs to start for startup and log on. Right, BitLocker to go is used for removable drives and prevents any unauthorized users. Right, so mobile device security, when we look at mobile device security, we have things like screen locks, remote wipes, device locator applications, and remote backup. Right, so screen locks would be generally when you lock your phone, right, you'd have something like maybe a password, which would be a set of characters, right? Maybe you have Face ID, right? That would be biometrics or fingerprint scanner, right? You could also have something like a pattern, right? A pattern, for example. So those are things to ensure that nobody accesses your device, right? You also have things like remote wipes and device locator applications, right? So when it comes to Apple and Android, you can go to something called either Find My iPhone or Find My Android, right? And what will happen is if your device, if you've registered your device on that website, as well as if you have if your device is on and has internet connection, right, it's able to locate the device, right? Locate the device maybe within a couple of Ks, but it will be able to find the device for you, right? It's also able to remotely wipe your device off of all of your data, right? That's a good feature if maybe you have a lot of sensitive data on your phone, and if your phone gets stolen or it gets misplaced, you don't want anyone to access it, right? You can also backup it. You can backup it using cloud services, right? Or you can use, maybe if you want to backup, you can backup it on your PC or computer or whatever the case is. Maybe you have an external hard drive that you want to backup it to. So you just transfer everything from your phone to that external. Okay, then we look at destruction and disposable methods of hard drives, right? We have low-level formatting versus standard formatting, right? With a standard format is accomplished by using the operating system's format tool or format utility, right? A low-level format, typically only accomplished in the factory, can be performed on the system or utility that can be used to wipe a disk clean. This process helps ensure that the information doesn't fall in the wrong hands. It must be performed even before a drive can be partitioned. Right? Then we can look at physical destruction. Physical destruction would be shredding, drilling, hammering, degassing, or incineration, right? So shredding, yeah, shredding your hard drive, you would drill through your hard drive, drill through the disks of your hard drive, right? Hammering would be breaking your hard drive, and degassing would be basically taking a very strong magnet and wiping the hard drive. So it'll be rubbing the hard drive to ensure that what's the word? What's the word? Mm, that you're able to wipe the hard drive, right? And incineration would be obviously fire. Right, then we look at securing a small office, home office network, right? Things like changing your default SSID, right? So basically your Wi-Fi network name, right? You change that, disabling SSID broadcasts, right? Disabling DHCP or using reservations, using MAC filtering when it comes to your network, right? IP filtering, using the strongest security available on the access point, right? Changing the static security keys every 2 to 4 weeks, limiting the user access accounts that can be used for wireless connectivity, using a pre-authentication system such as Radius, using remote access filters, using IPsec tunneling over the wireless links, turning down the signal strength, remove wireless access from your LAN, right? Antenna access point placement, limiting the reach of the network, right? So how far it's going to be sending out the signals or repeating the frequency, right? And radio power level. Some APs use power to limit reach, right? So those are some of the ways that you would secure a network. Okay, guys, so do you have any questions? Yeah, Kitty Bone?
Yes, Adrian. My question is that um, what do we find that these types of malware, such as zombies and botnets,
Zombies and botnets.
is
Okay, so when we talk about zombies, zombies would be the infected, it would be the infected PC when the PC is already infected by a virus, right? And the PC would be able to basically share the virus onto the network or share the virus on any removable media.
okay. But like, I want to understand who came with these words such as zombies, retroviruses. Like, our
Mm.
group is it retro? It means that our group is a virus.
Yeah. No, it's well, I think as technology evolved, like how we come up with words like maybe selfies, for example, it's like a neologism, You know, it's something that as it gets created, we think of like with our physical environment and what we've been through and everything that exists around us. Maybe we try to apply it to IT. So that's why it sounds very similar to words that we would be speaking in normal terms, right? And that's why we use it there. So just like
Okay.
how a zombie would be dead and infecting everybody, so
Oh, okay.
too a PC.
Okay. Things.
Okay. Anyone else? Sandile?
Adrian,
Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to ask, is it possible that you can maybe create your own firewall that you can put in your PC?
Um, well, I know that there's specific vendors that have firewalls, but I'm not too sure. Okay, Malusi?
Now it would be like you need more like developing skills in terms of you like to get to that level whereby you can create your own firewall, right? Like there's software firewalls, there's hardware firewalls, of which most of them are run by like big companies like Cisco, Palo Alto, and so you need to like good skills in order for you to be able to develop a firewall, yeah, that will control, right? So you need
So,
like proper development skills, yeah.
but it's possible.
It is possible, yeah.
Okay.
Letavo?
Yes, I wanted to ask, you spoke about hiding the SSID.
Mhm.
First question, is it considered ethical or should I say legal? And then the other thing is, since it won't be discoverable, like for new employees, will it automatically connect it to them when you add them to the domain, or how does it work?
I would think that it is ethical. You are allowed to do it because it would be your network. Um, with regards to adding it, I'm not too sure. With regards to adding it, I'm
Okay.
not.
So basically, the SSID, Letabo, is talking about the service set identifier, which is like your Wi-Fi name, right? So at home, let's say you have bought yourself a Wi-Fi router, and then you give it a name to say Letabo 123. That's an SSID, a service set identifier. And then when it comes to cybersecurity, that's not like a strong security feature. You only use that just to protect yourself, maybe from your neighbor who's an amateur when it comes to IT, because people that are good with IT, they can find their way into your network. If the SSID, hiding SSID is only your security feature to that. So SSID is just like your Wi-Fi name. That's an SSID, of which it is legal for you to hide that because you own that network. It is your network. And then being found by the people in your network. So what you do is, if you know your Wi-Fi name and then you've hidden the SSID, then you just have to type in that SSID in the options of connecting to that network. So people that are supposed to connect to that network will be able to connect to that network as long you own the network, even though you hidden the SSID. Yeah.
Okay, so I think I was misinformed because last time I checked, I heard that it was unethical to hide it.
Now it is allowed because it's just your Wi-Fi name, right? Because an example, like when you're buying a router from, let's say it's a Huawei router, right? It comes in with its own default SSID. For example, Huawei maybe 253. That's the name of the router. But when I get it, like when I configure it, I have to change the SSID, give it my own name, or give my family name, or give my department name. So yes, you change that every time when you buy it. So the SSID is just the Wi-Fi name. Yeah.
Sandile, do you have another question?
Yeah. So in terms of the network, the VPN and your own network, is it possible? How can I use the private VPN? The private one VPN.
The private VPN, you would have either hardware or software that's compatible with your current device, and then obviously you would What you would just configure it so that you are able to use it. Maybe for example, could we say what's this one called? Remote desktop, for example. Malusi, can we say remote desktop?
So the VPN, what actually does is it creates like a tunnel. Like let's say you are working from home and then you want to connect to our work environment, right? So you create a tunnel which kind of protects your network. So when, especially for the men in the middle attack, whereby people they gain access to that information that you trying to access from your work server. So the VPN, it creates a tunnel that no one can be able to access or penetrate to that tunnel, or of which like some of the VPNs, if like they feel or they detect that someone is trying to penetrate to that VPN, what it does is it changes the line or it changes the path that it was using and then moves to a different one so that no one can gain access to the VPN. Some they use VPN just to change their location. For example, there is maybe an American channel that you want to watch, but it's only allowed for only Americans to watch that. And then you want to change your location to say, okay, maybe you are in America, right? So VPN also can be also used for that to kind of change the location where you are, and then like the system will think that you are in America, and then you can be able to watch shows that Americans watch and stuff like that. So VPN mainly is used like to protect your data, especially your data in transit, data moving from your computer to the server, or some they can use it to just change the location to say, okay, even though you're in South Africa, but the servers think that or pick up as if like you are in a different continent. So VPN can be used in for so many things. So we have different types of VPNs: the IPsec, the VSec. So there are so many types, right? Depending on the company needs or the client need or your needs per se. Yeah, go ahead, Sandile.
So is it possible that I can use VPN on my personal devices, like my phone?
Yeah, we have apps that are used for VPN. So you can download a VPN app, and then it will, especially the VPN apps that people all usually download, is for them to change the location. For example, we had a situation where in Zimbabwe, people were blocked to access, was it Facebook or Twitter? So what most people did was to download a VPN application, and then they were able to access things outside of Zimbabwe, like that were not allowed. So a country can create a law that will, let's say you are blocked to access YouTube. And then if we're blocked to access to YouTube, and then you download a VPN will change your location to say, okay, you are in Botswana, you choose any country that you want to be in. And then now the laws that apply to people in South Africa, they won't affect you because now the systems now, they pick up you as if like you're connecting from a different country. So you can download an application, VPN application, and then use it for that.
Even sometimes people use it for YouTube because sometimes you might see a video that says this video is not available in your country, for example. So you'd use a VPN and maybe you'd say that you want to log into like a UK server, for example. So then it'll pick up that you're from UK and then you can access whatever it is. Or even people use it for Netflix as well. Maybe they want to use a different Netflix, like a different country's Netflix to pick up what they have. So they'd use a VPN. Sandile?
Okay, no.
Oh, good. Kidibone?
Oh yes, Adrian, with regards to the VPN, my YouTube is no longer working. So what should I do? Should I use the VPN method in
No,
order
no
for
longer work because
my YouTube is no longer working?
yeah, why?
I don't
What
know
is
why.
it saying? What's it saying?
Yes, when I'm trying to log inside of it, it doesn't like it keeps on saying I should try again, and it's not working anymore. So I'm asking that what should I do in order for it to work in regards to the VPN? Because I heard you saying something that has to do with VPN and the YouTube.
Yeah, no, that'll be for if it's a specific video that you're trying to watch that's not available in your country, then you could use a
Oh,
VPN. Yeah.
oh, okay. So what about the YouTube on its own?
The
What
YouTube.
should I? Mm, mm.
Well, we can try and figure it out. What we can do is when you guys come back into the office, then
Okay.
you can just call me and I can check if I can help.
Okay,
You might find out it just need an update, right? Try to update your YouTube. Try to update your applications, man.
okay, thanks.
Letabo?
Mr. Moyo.
Yeah. I think Sandile's hand was up before mine.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
like to add, I'd like to add on Kidiboni.
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, like most of our device need a system upgrade. Ne? So he can she can try and update the whole system of the device.
Yeah, like if there's an application that is not working fine in your computer, I think the best thing to do is just try and update first and then see. I'm sure she's using an older version of YouTube application, so she just need to update it. If that doesn't work, then that must be something else, right? As you know, with troubleshooting, you go through all of these solutions that we come up with and then see which one works. But I think it's more of an update thing.
Okay. Who else? Letabo? Who are you gonna ask?
Yes,
Mhm.
in regards to antiviruses, I heard you spoke about retro stealth. I forgot the other one. I think we can consider antivirus one of the last lines of defense. So, how do you detect those attacks since they are targeting the antivirus itself?
Mm, I'm not sure. Malusi?
What's your question? Later, what was your question?
I was asking, how do you detect the stealth and retro since they are attacking the antivirus itself? What solution is there for them?
All right. So the best solution these days when it comes to viruses, right? We use what we call the AI, artificial intelligence, right? So if you look at the antiviruses that we're using now, most of them they are using what we call the signatures, right? Which Adrian spoke about. Says it is like more of an algorithm that is used to pick up any virus. So the signatures, those signatures, it's a behavior. So an antivirus, what it's looking for is looking for a behavior out of the norm, right? Like if you so with an AI system, what we do is we create what we call a baseline to note, okay, our system is supposed to behave this way, and then if anything deviates from how we want things to behave, then what you call the AI system will pick up, okay, there is something out of the norm, and then send at us. Or if we have two types of systems, we have like the intrusion prevention system and then the intrusion detection system, right? The IDS, what it does, it detects, but it doesn't block. And then we have the IPS, intrusion prevention system, which prevents, it can pick up or take, there's something out of the ordinary, right? Out of the norm, right? It picks up that. So it will prevent that and then stop that type of attack. So we have two methods that we can use, which is the IPS and then the IDS. Anything out of the norm, then the system picks it up. So all of these malware or the viruses, they come up with a certain behavior. So the AI, it is looking for a behavior that is outside the norm. It creates a baseline first to say, okay, here is how my system behaves, right? And then it records that baseline. And then after that, let's say for 1 month or 2 months, and then get attacked by a virus, or the virus tries to come into our systems, what happens is the AI will pick up any behavior out of the norm. So it will block that type of behavior. It will stop that type of behavior. But the problem is sometimes we get a lot of like what you call this, it's called the positive, negative, or something like that. I forgot the term, but there's a term whereby, let's say you thought that the AI was positive about something, while it was positive about an attack, and then you find out, okay, no, that thing is incorrect. It's not really an attack and stuff like that. So the AI these days, those are the ones that we use to pick up any problems that has to do with our systems. So anything out of the ordinary, anything out of the norm, the system is supposed to pick it up.
And Malusi, generally with AI, it's included in the antiviruses.
Yeah, because we have, when it comes to AI, we have two types of AIs, right? We have the machine learning and then the deep learning. The deep learning is whereby the AI learns on its own, right? You put it in an environment and then it learns on its own. It creates a baseline on its own without being taught by anyone. And then the machine learning is whereby we feed it with information. So we tell the AI that, okay, look out for things like this and that. That's the machine learning, right? So the one that we usually use for antivirus is the deep learning, where it picks up or it learns on its own. So that if someone else creates a virus today, for deep learning, the deep learning will be able to pick up, unlike the machine learning where we fed the system with information. What if someone creates something that we don't have on our system? So that's the two options that we have when it comes to AI, artificial intelligence, right? We have the machine learning and the deep learning, whereby sometimes the machine learning, we say we feed the system with information. We say, okay, this is a firewall. These are the things that you have to look out for, right? These are the signatures that most of the viruses always run with, right? So look out for these signatures on the machine learning. But on the deep learning, we just say, okay, this is an environment, be a child, learn from this environment, and then after a while, anything outside this, pick it up as what? Something that's not supposed to be part of the environment. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Guys, any other questions? Okay, then I think that's it. Oh, Sandile?
So in terms of artificial intelligence, so will you maybe teach us, or you just
I think maybe we could elaborate on that in one of the future lessons.
okay?
Yeah, AI is one of my favorite subjects, right? We can look at the two, right? Like the AI, and then where you're gonna see AI being used these days. Because most of the companies these days are using AI to, especially in security, right? In cyber security, we rely now on AI alone, right? Like simple things like the banking systems, right? It can, especially the deep learning, it can pick up your behavior, right? And say, okay, Sandile always get paid this much amount of money. And then Sandile, once he gets paid, this is the amount of money that he withdraws. And then Sandile always usually withdraws his money at these specific ATMs and stuff like that. So the deep learning will create like what you call a portfolio of Sandile's behavior, right? And said, okay, this is how Sandile behave. So every time something out of the ordinary, out of the norm, right, happens, the deep learning says, okay, why is this happening? Is it a cause for concern, or it's just like it is something that, okay, Sandile usually do and stuff like that? So for example, let's say now someone withdraws money from your account in Joburg, right? And then something else happens in your account, but it is happening in Cape Town, maybe within a time difference of maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Then the system will say, okay, this is really something that is not normal, right? Like Sandler can't do these two transactions like at the same time, like after 5 minutes within different areas like this. So the AI or the deep learning will be able to pick up, okay, since I have a portfolio of the Sandler's behavior, and then it will keep on checking, okay, is this thing that is happening now, is it part of what Sandler usually do? If it's outside that, it will check that, is it a cause for concern? Is it something that I have to send to the maybe IT department to say, okay, something out of the norm is happening? That's why sometimes you get messages either from the bank, and then they send you a message about what you call cyber attacks and all those things. So that means the system will be picking something up that is kind of like close to maybe an attack happening to your account. So they're just trying to let you know about the cyber attacks that happen. So that happens in the AI side. So the AI also can be used for, especially the data science, data mining. So we use artificial intelligence to pick up maybe behavior of certain things. So yeah, there is a lot that to talk about when it comes to cyber security, right? So yeah.
Okay, cool. And then Malusi, I wanted to ask with regards to artificial intelligence. So you know that they say that on websites we have things like chatbots where we'd have a bot that we can ask questions to. So would that be deep learning or would that be machine learning? Malusi, is your mic muted?
Oh, sorry, I was talking there. Sorry. So that one mostly the chatbots, right, is more of a machine learning, right? So most of the guys when we started with it, like they were using like the machine learning. So they will feed, let's say for example, they will feed the system with the information that or the questions that people will usually ask and stuff like that. Or some they will use like the deep learning, whereby they will use a human being, right, to just conduct all of the classes, respond to all of the queries that are coming from different people, and then the system will learn from that, pick up with, okay, what are the questions that are people asking, and then how is the machine answering and stuff like that. So it's two ways, right? We can use the machine learning or the deep learning, but most of the times the deep learning I find it to be more effective. But all of these two, they depend on what environment you want to put the system in. For example, there was like the part whereby the other countries, they were introducing the robot police, right? So some were asking, okay, which one is more will be effective, the deep learning or machine learning, right? When it comes to robot police and stuff like that. So some were saying, okay, if we feed the system with information about, okay, how the criminal looks like or how the criminal behaves and stuff like that, in the end, you'll find that the robot will end up catching the wrong people because there are certain group of people that we consider to be maybe criminals, or there's certain dress code that we consider to be criminal. So it's based when we're putting a system into an environment, just check with, okay, what type of behavior or what type of information do we want to get from the system. So most of the people these days, they use deep learning. You put a system in an environment and then it just learns on its own. Okay, the start that was. Wait, am I on?
Yeah, Malusi.
Oh, okay, sorry, I was on mute. Okay, so I was talking about the AI, right? The deep learning, right? So to say the study that was done was they took one robot and then they put it in an environment or in a room, and then they made that robot to watch movies, horror movies, right? And then the violent movies, the action movies, right? So after a week or some time, right, the robot, the behavior that it was showing that behavior of the what you call the violent behavior.
Yeah.
All of those things was coming from the movies or the information that the system had collected, right? So for me, I feel like when it comes to AI, it depends with the environment or the tool that you want to use the system for. So to go for deep learning or machine learning, it depends with the environment, and then they also looking at the risk that comes with that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, one more thing that people, scientists or these engineers, have not been finding, they have not been getting correctly, is to find to add human like into these systems, right? Sometimes some of them they don't. You can feel that you're talking to a machine, right? Like there's no human in it, right? Like it's still lacking in some of the systems that are using AI. So, but they are still really working hard on that one. Of which I think like maybe 2 years, 3 years to come, you'll find systems that are really kind of like feel like human and stuff like that. So back in the day, most of them they were lacking that part. You could feel that you're talking to a machine, right? Like there is that human element that is lacking, that was lacking in most of the systems that were used back then. But they are really working hard on that one. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Kiribone, you want to ask?
Yes, I want to know that does AI come from Japanese or Chinese? Because I normally watch these movies, like James Bond movies. Like whenever he's driving a car, you can hear that his car will tell him, it will give him certain instructions, like how does he, where does he go? Like the GPS will show him where does he go. So I want to know in regards to the AI. So, does the AI come from Chinese, Japanese, or American? Yes.
I'm not too sure, but I mean, it's not just Japanese that would develop AI, so it's different people, right? So it could come from many different places. Yeah, it does. It's not like only Japanese people that work with AI, or that has developed it. Maybe we need
Yeah.
to see.
Yeah, it's not only Japanese, as Adrian just said, but like most of these countries now have tapped into the AI. So everyone is building a system that is using AI. So unless if we trying to look at it this way to say, okay, which country is really leading when it comes to technology and stuff like that. But Japan and America, we can't say they are the only ones that are using the AI. But yeah, South Africa, you can find out there are tools that we're building that are relying on the AI. So it's not only Japan or America. Yeah, there are many countries that are really relying on the artificial intelligence.
Also, because like our country, like our African countries are developing, they're not like the European countries, like your United States of America and other countries. Hence, like my question is, would AI probably be discovered in China or
Maybe.
Thailand? Because Chinese I can say is the fastest growing country with technology.
Yeah, maybe in the beginning, maybe because they have more resources.
Mm.
But I think with just learning about AI, I mean, education is free. You can learn, you can study by yourself. So it's easy for you to learn. But with regards to resources, they probably do have resources, and that's what gives them the competitive edge when it comes to AI.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Kedibone. Okay, guys. So yeah, I think we'll conclude there today. Thanks so much for your attendance, guys. And Malusi, thank you.
Siyabo.